Hey, this is Everett, producer of The Scalpel. Jeff Childers is a commercial litigation attorney from Gainesville, Florida, who won a case, the only appellate decision in the country, finding mandatory masking is presumptively unconstitutional. He also won the first and only brand injunction hearing in the country, shutting down a city's vaccinate or terminate policy. Mask and vaccine mandates can be beaten. They have been beaten, and this is how to do it.
The Scalpel with Dr. Keith Rose.
Cutting down to the truth through history and experience. Subscribe to The Scalpel wherever you listen to podcasts. Follow us on Instagram at The Scalpel Podcast, on Twitter at The Scalpel Edge. Email kfr@scalpeledge.com or the website scalpeledge.com.
The next episode of The Scalpel starts now.
Welcome to The Scalpel. This is Dr. Keith Rose. We have a guest today. We have a gentleman who I met several weeks ago at an actual board meeting. A board meeting out on a large ranch in South Texas where a group of us got together to talk about what we could do to help restore this nation. I met Jeff Childers, and when we started talking, I found out he was an attorney. Now, I'm a physician, so it's usually when physicians meet attorneys, we kind of dial it back a little bit. But as I listened to Jeff talk, I realized I was talking to someone who was much smarter than I am. You see, Jeff is a commercial litigation attorney from Gainesville, Florida, who started working in constitutional law 18 months ago when he challenged his county's mask mandate. He won the case, getting the only appellate decision in the country finding mandatory masking is presumptively unconstitutional. Now, this guy, he's not a young guy, he's not an old guy, but he started constitutional law 18 months ago and has the only victory on masking. Childers won the first and only brand injunction hearing in the country, shutting down a city's vaccinate or terminate policy as well. He wrote an article, What the Church Needs to Know About COVID-19, and that went viral and has over 1 million views. It was such a good article, it got him thrown off most social mediums. Childers also started organizing a group of allied small attorneys to work together against the mandates. He is helping the country focus and create activist groups. And he's a board member of CCDF, Concerned Citizens for the Defense of Freedom, where I'm on the board. And he's standing up national legal groups. This is one man in Florida who's making a difference in the nation, who's making a reverberation from the great state of Florida that's going to be felt throughout this country. So I know you got a busy schedule today, Jeff. I really appreciate you joining me.
Good morning, Keith. How are you?
I'm good. Jeff, let's jump right into it. Tell everyone you got started 18 months ago. You won the first and, to my knowledge, the only upheld decision on mask mandates. And talk a little bit about what just happened as far as vaccine mandates in Florida.
Sure. And it's a really good story. I mean, it's just crazy how everything sort of fell together. Kind of like a puzzle once you finally figure out where the colors are and everything. So we got that mask decision from the appellate court. It came down in May of this year. And like you said, they found that these masks are presumptively unconstitutional. But the important thing was that they bought our argument that the reason why is because mandatory face masking violates your bodily autonomy. Okay? So remember that. That's really important to the next part of the story. In fact, the one dissenting judge to our decision, and you're going to love this, he went on and on. His dissent was twice as long as the main decision that upheld our theory.
Well, liberals don't like to be disagreed with, so they're going to rant. And so
we really triggered him because we invoked a lot of abortion law, ironically, to support and protect your right to control your own face, right? You can imagine how that works. And the dissenting judge was outraged. He literally said that. He said, it's outrageous that anybody would compare such a minor, trivial act as putting a cloth on your face to the fundamental right of abortion, right? But that wasn't the best part. The best part was, after getting all worked up about it, he said, face masking is, so non-intrusive, and it's so, minor, and it's, barely any effort at all. It's the least you can do for your fellow citizens. And this is what he said. It's not like coerced medical treatments or anything.
And did you just say thank you at that point? Like, God bless you. When evil gets going, they make lots of mistakes.
Yeah. I had so much fun quoting the dissent in my brief in the vaccine case, right? Because you saw exactly where I was going with that. And so when just a few months later, we roll in and the city of Gainesville here passed one of the strictest and shortest vaccinate or terminate policies in the state of Florida. So they were requiring all their city employees to be vaccinated by October 1st or to be terminated. And they weren't granting any exemptions. It was just straight across the board. The director of the utility begged them not to do it. We have internal communications from this guy that show he was saying, listen, I can't guarantee the safe and efficient operation of the utility if I lose this many people, right?
Correct. And you'll lose 30 to 40 to 50% of your people if you mandate vaccines.
Yeah, the internal numbers suggested maybe even higher than that, and he was already down 10% in general. So but the city commissioners just ignored it, and they went forward, and ultimately we wound up getting 250 plaintiffs. That is, people who signed on to the lawsuit: city employees, firefighters, cops, electrical utility workers, paramedics, first responders of every kind, ambulance drivers, you name it. We had every kind of city employee in that 250. And what's funny about that is there's only 2,200 employees of the city of Gainesville anyways, right? We had over 10% of the
That's
entire
incredible.
Workforce in our lawsuit.
That's incredible.
Yeah. And, people ask me all the time, well, did you do a class action? And for a variety of reasons, I don't like class actions. I just put them all in the case caption, all 250 of them. The case caption goes on for 2.5 pages.
I love it.
In the lawsuit. Yeah, it was great.
So step the listeners through. You won the mask mandate first. You were successful in that. The one dissenter actually spoke. It's not like we're forcing them to take medical treatment. And then this case comes up in Gainesville. Explain to the folks listening, because I think this is real important. Right now, we don't want to just be a show that talks about the problems. We want to give solutions. And so step everyone through, because there may be an attorney out there listening. I know we have a lot of attorneys that listen to this. I don't know if they're listening to it because they enjoy it or they're looking for something to go after me with. But step everyone through how you did this and what they can do wherever they live to be successful.
So if I were to talk to attorneys, what I would say is this vaccine mandate is completely beatable. It's absolutely unconstitutional. They can't do it. They've never done anything like this before. There's tons of good law available to you to use. And we set up a template in our case. I mean, I worked so hard to boil it down for the judge and make it a simple, we've got 5 assertions, right? And some of them are going to be too technical for your audience, but I'm going to try to give the attorneys who are listening a taste of it so that they understand. And this template, it absolutely works in Florida. It's a killer in Florida. We solved Florida with regard to government employers. Private employers are a different problem, right? That we weren't even addressing because these are city employees. But for government employees, we've solved it in Florida. But that template can now be taken and used in other states. It needs to be domesticated a little bit because it relies on state law. So each attorney in a different state is going to have to find those local pieces that they need. But here's the key. This is what we did that was completely different than what anybody else is doing. Have you ever heard of this 1905 case, Jacobson versus Massachusetts?
I think I have, but go ahead. I'm weird. I like to read a lot.
Yeah. So you're a law nerd and you've been reading about this stuff. And this case has been making the rounds for almost a year now. And this is this antique, dusty old case from 1905, where the U.S. Supreme Court reviewed a little law in Massachusetts that said people had, if there was a smallpox outbreak, people had to get the vaccine for that or pay a $5 fine. That's it, right? Nothing about losing your job or, whatever other kind of coercive strategies, weekly testing. None of that was involved in this. It was
no $700,000 OSHA fines.
Right, exactly. You could just go down to the courthouse and pay your $5 fine and go on your way. But anyway, that's what the Supreme Court was looking at. And so everybody who's in the pro-vaccine camp forever has been talking about this case and saying, Jacobson proves that it's constitutional to mandate vaccines, right? So you people quit yet talking to us about constitutional issues. It's game over. Jacobson, this 130-year-old case that with facts totally different from what we're looking at. And by the way, that smallpox vaccine, guess how long it had been around at the time?
It'd been around decades.
Since the 1700s.
Yeah, well, over 100 years. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're not talking about some brand new technology that doesn't have any long-term safety data, right?
Well, also in a disease where it was fatal in a third of the people that got it. I mean, that was the actual science, that a third of the people that got that disease, it was fatal, and there were no early treatments for that disease.
And so, most lawyers on, I'm going to call it our side, the pro-choice side, were terrified of this case, right? Because they had been told for so long that it was a Constitution killer and there's nothing you can do about it. And everybody was trying to run from Jacobson. And there were some scrappy folks who were trying to make the arguments like we were just making, that you can distinguish it on the facts, right? Smallpox is totally different from COVID. It's, got a good vaccine that works, right? And isn't leaky, and it's actually sterilizing, right? And the penalty was not very high, and it's a much more serious virus. And you can make all those arguments. People were doing that. But the pro-vax folks were just like, nope, it says it's constitutional, right? And as if it's some kind of a conversation ender. And one of the things about these older cases is they often have archaic language. And because they didn't have computers back then, they didn't really spell things out for you, right? Somebody had to probably handwrite that. So that decision, it's short and very condensed. And so you really have to think about it and unpack it. But it's not bad. And anybody can do this, even a layperson. And if you read Jacobson, what we discovered is Jacobson does not say what they say it says. Shocker, right? That they've been deceptive about what Jacobson really says. What Jacobson says is the Supreme Court was like, look, the federal Constitution doesn't say anything about mandatory vaccinations. Now, remember, this is long before they discovered a right to privacy in the shadows of the Constitution in the 70s in the Roe v. Wade case, right? So this is way before that. So the Supreme Court was like, look, there's nothing in the federal Constitution that talks about mandatory vaccinations. So, and this is really the critical part, you have to look to state law to find out the answer. Well, guess what, Judge? Guess what Florida's state law says about mandatory vaccinations? It says, Judge, that you can't do it. And so what we argued when we went into court 2 weeks ago was, we said, Judge, we didn't run from Jacobson. We didn't try to distinguish Jacobson. The city spent a page and a half in its 12-page brief on Jacobson, right? So we walked in and we said, Judge, we love Jacobson. We all agree that's the controlling law. And you know what Jacobson says, Judge? It says you have to look to state law. You have to. You have no choice. And when you look to state law, you find that the Florida Constitution's got a right to privacy in it, which includes a right to refuse unwanted medical treatments. And Judge, you have no choice but to find that this thing is presumptively unconstitutional. And once it's presumptively unconstitutional, then the government has to meet this very high standard called strict scrutiny. And they have to prove that their policy furthers a compelling state interest using the least restrictive means. Now, the second part of that, the government almost always fails when they hit a strict scrutiny type law. And the reason why is because of that second part, the least restrictive means, because the government has to prove a negative. Using evidence, they have to prove that they considered every other possible way. And the way they picked was the least restrictive one.
Which is just the opposite. It's the most restrictive one.
That's right. They're never going to be, they didn't, in my case, they didn't even try. They didn't even put on any evidence. They did not lift a finger to try to meet that standard. And the judge, if you read the order, the judge just excoriates them for that. She probably mentions the fact that they didn't put on any evidence 5 times in a short order. So, so that's the template, Keith. Other lawyers can take that. You start with Jacobson. Jacobson says, look to state law. Go find the law that you need in your state. Almost every state has got helpful law. In 1905, the Supreme Court looked at the Massachusetts Constitution, and the Massachusetts Constitution is a collectivist wet dream. I mean, it's all talking about how everything's for the common good and all men work together and make sacrifices for each other. And there was all kinds of language in there that the Supreme Court could say, well, it looks like they're, probably going to allow mandatory vaccinations here, but that's an outlier. Massachusetts is way out there on the left, probably the most leftist constitution in the country. Almost everywhere else, there's something to use in state law. I was on the phone last night with a bunch of guys, lawyers from South Carolina. They're getting ready to put on a hearing coming up next week. And I was helping them out and giving them ideas. And, once I laid out this framework for them, they got really excited. They were like, oh yeah, that's gold, man. That's exactly what we need to do. Right. And so if you can just get your arms around this simple 5 assertion framework, you can beat these mask mandates.
Not only the mask mandates, but the vaccine mandates as well. Correct.
I'm sorry. See, I've been litigating this stuff so long. That's what I meant to say. The 5, let me say it again so it's clear. The 5 assertion framework that we created is the way you beat all these vaccine mandates all around the country, and including at the federal level, right? Because listen, Keith, Jacobson says the U.S. Constitution doesn't say anything about vaccine mandates, so you have to look to state law. So what does that say about a federal statute? They've got to look to state law to find out if it's constitutional.
Can this be applied to other issues that we're dealing with right now, or do we have to stick to this mask vaccine mandate issue?
Well, so like which issues are you thinking about?
Well, I'm just trying to, a lot of folks, first of all, I think the vaccine mandates is where we need to make our stand. Because like you said, you and I have talked about this ad nauseum. The vaccine is being mandated for disease that is almost uniformly survivable across all age groups under 70. We have early treatment. And from my understanding, you can't mandate an emergency use authorization vaccine. And the one that received FDA approval, the vaccine that actually received FDA approval, is not even available here in the United States. So it's a big bait and switch, kind of like back in the 70s when they had the approval for vaccine for swine flu, but they gave everyone else a different vaccine for swine flu. And so, and imagine there's probably some case law floating around from the 70s in the swine flu vaccine. But right now, there's a lot of people, a lot of parents, a lot of folks that work for cities, counties, et cetera, that are very unsettled by this. So this is a way to do it on the government side. How about on the private side? Is there any crossover to that?
So we've only just begun trying to work on the private employer problem. I know that in a lot of states, including in Florida, we're working on getting legislation passed that would be helpful for that. Now, that takes time, right? And one of the things that our opponents are doing is accelerating everything and trying to ram it through fast so we don't have time to get the laws passed.
They're flooding the zone. They're doing the Cloward Piven. They're trying to bury us. But my question to you is, and I've seen this, I mean, I'm not an attorney. I don't claim to be one. But I've seen it brought up to where they're trying to hit physicians. You need to do X if you take government money or have government contracts. And I would say what's good for the goose is good for the gander. If they're going to try to mandate vaccinations based on the fact that we receive government money, could you use this argument on companies that receive government funding to say they can't mandate?
Yeah, so there is a category of private employer called quasi-governmental, and when they have so many connections to government, they become what's the law considers a quasi-governmental actor, and then they're subject to constitutional limitations. And so there may be some with
you like Facebook, Amazon. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, no, those guys, I mean, obviously they're doing what they're doing because they're not subject to constitutional limitations. But I want to respond to something that you just said. And you were talking about sort of how a doctor looks at these COVID vaccines, right? And you were quoting the statistics about, how insignificant the COVID-19 virus is, generally speaking, especially relative to most other risks that people encounter in their daily lives, right? And all that kind of stuff. And that's exactly how a doctor would look at it. But let me tell you how a lawyer looks at it. If they get away with this vaccine mandate, it will open Pandora's box and everything is coming out. This is a line where they are making us into property.
Correct.
And for your listeners, think about it this way. A farmer has a herd of cattle. Right? You Texas guys, you'll get this one real fast, right? You have a herd of cattle, and that farmer can inject anything that he wants into those cattle. Why?
They're his property.
They're his property, right? And nobody would argue with that. If he wants to kill them all, he can, right? If he wants to take the drug that just came out that's never been tested and put them in his cattle, he can do that because they're his property. Right. And so this whole spirit of mandatory vaccination is at its core wrapped around this concept that your body is somebody else's property. And that is not a new idea, Keith. We've had that idea before, right? We fought a bloody civil war.
Correct.
To end that exact concept. And yet here we are right back at the beginning. Right, with the federal government and even all these private employers who are thinking of their employees' bodies as their property, like an HVAC that they want to install some newfangled UV virus killer in, right? That just came out, and for $1,200 you can put that gadget into your HVAC systems and it'll zap all the viruses that pass through there, right?
And you just got me thinking about something, Jeff. That's the employers are mandating this because they're saying, and this may be something to think about, because I have a lot of experience with OSHA. I have a lot of experience in case management. I have a company. We do this around the country. We do occupational case management. The employers are saying OSHA is requiring us. That's a government regulated agency. That's a government agency, OSHA.
Right.
Is requiring us. They're going to mandate vaccines, or we will be fined if we don't do that. That falls right under the auspice of a federal mandate because they're using OSHA, Occupational Health and Safety, to mandate this. And the irony is, and I would tell every company listening to this, every person that works in a company listening to this, if you mandate vaccines, you're going to have, I believe, 20 to 30% adverse reactions at a minimum that are going to become OSHA recordable lost time that will hit your books, will hit your EMR, will hit your reinsurance rates, will hit your workers' comp rates, and could decimate your workforce when you do this. So there's going to be real-world consequences. And then the same organization that mandated that you had to have vaccines and was the enforcement arm for the government is going to turn around and fine you for all the OSHA recordables you have. How in any sane world does this make sense?
Well, let me reassure you further that, where I would stop all that analysis is right after you said that's a federal agency. Because federal agencies are subject to the Constitution, right? So this OSHA mandate, whatever it finally looks like, and by the way, it's invisible, Keith. There isn't any.
No, they're putting it in this new omnibus bill.
Well, they're still working on the rules. And, whenever 3 weeks ago when Joe Biden announced it to great fanfare, they hadn't even started yet, okay? So they're still working. There's a million questions they have to work out, right? What constitutes sufficient evidence of vaccination? What about natural immunity? Are you going to let those people skate, or do they have to get vaccinated anyways?
They've already come out. OSHA has already come out last, what I read, and said that they will not, natural immunity does not qualify. This is, medically, this makes no sense. I mean, there's dozens of studies now on natural immunity. The largest one that I'm aware of is 700,000 patients out of Israel, which show natural immunity is better than vaccinated immunity. And I think that's an oxymoron, vaccinated immunity, because there's no vaccine that has been shown to consistently prevent the acquisition or the spread of coronavirus. It just lessens the symptoms, which kicks it into the category of a therapeutic at best.
Yeah. So that's fine. And if OSHA, when we see the final rule, and right now it's all talk, right? Because they can change their mind and they can do whatever they want to up until the day they publish that rule. But let's say they go with what you said and they refuse to acknowledge any benefit from natural immunity. Well, that's just another lawsuit right there, right? That's an equal protection argument. It actually moves the standard lower. There's a rational basis standard that's easier for the government to meet, but they would fail in this case, I believe, under even the rational basis test. You don't even need to get to strict scrutiny. So there's all these questions and problems like, what about work from home people? What's OSHA going to do about work from home people, right? What about, they're going to try to characterize this as like a hard hat requirement, right? So you go on the job site, you have to wear your hard hat. You come into work, you got to wear your vaccine, okay? But what about everybody else in that building? What about all the customers that come in? Is OSHA going to require them to be vaccinated? What about the contractors, the UPS driver who comes in to deliver a package?
That doesn't have to have the vaccine because they've been excluded under the government.
Yeah, because they have a good union. So what about all of that stuff? So how is this OSHA policy even effective if there's all these people coming in and out of businesses that OSHA isn't regulating? It's not like a construction site. On a construction site, everybody has to wear a hard hat, right? If you were to go visit your friend on the construction site.
Right. No, I visit the sites. Yeah. Yeah. You have to wear a hard hat. We work on the pipeline. We have to wear a hard hat. My employees do.
Right. So, OSHA's got all these problems, right? And they have to come up with a policy that covers every type of industry in every geography and every type of job, from the secretary to the, construction worker to the guys who work in the back to cooks and prep chefs and, you name it, right? And one rule, they're supposed to do all this. Okay. So it is a monumental task, and that doesn't even get to whether they have authority or not. And it's so poorly thought through. So OSHA is an opt-in federal deal, and about half the states never opted in. So what are they going to do with those states? Right.
What would you say to folks down here in Texas that are working at a refinery? And the refinery is telling all the subcontractors, you must have vaccinated employees or we're not going to let you. We'll just go find someone else to work here. How would you deal with that?
So what we're telling folks to do is submit their exemptions and document everything, and make the private employer fire you. Don't quit, because it is quite possible that when all this is over, we're going to have 20 years of litigation against all these private employers for wrongful termination suits.
Oh, I agree. And I go ahead, finish your thought and
It'll be bigger than the tobacco litigation.
I agree. And you know where I also think there's another avenue of litigation, and you tell me if I'm wrong here. It's in my side of the fence. I think medical doctors that are sending people home without treatment, and medical doctors that are not using early therapeutics that have been established and shown in peer-reviewed journals, not whether they're talked about or not, but they're actually out there to save lives. I think these people will also be liable, and I think this will turn into something like the tobacco industry or asbestos, where these doctors are going to be sued. And I don't say this lightly, rightly so, because they are violating their Hippocratic oath. They are not treating patients, and there is no, I will argue with anyone, I will debate anyone on the facts of early therapeutics. There is no evidence-based medicine that shows sending someone home increases their risk of survival. There's no evidence-based medicine to show that sending someone home and when they come back and can barely breathe, put him on a ventilator, increases their risk of survival. Just the opposite. It seals their fate. So I think that physicians, and speak to this, will they be liable for their actions and, more importantly, for their inactions?
So that's a good question, and it's complicated because in many states, like in Florida, the legislature passed the liability shield law, right? And it says if you operate in good faith and you comply with the best guidance available at the time, that you've got a complete shield to civil liability on COVID-19 claims. Now,
see, I don't believe this. As a physician, I don't believe it's operating in good faith. You're either lazy or complicit.
Yeah. So that's where you get into some area of potential liability for doctors if plaintiffs can show that it was willful and not negligent, right? If it's negligent, you just didn't bother to do the research, and so you followed the CDC. But if you can show that the doctor knew or should have known, right? If they had done the normal things that normal doctors should do to inform themselves about, patient care in a pandemic, and the doctor failed to do that willfully, right? Not because something stopped them from doing it, but because they chose not to do it. Then now you may have them in territory where they're in gross negligence or intentionality. And that's going to bypass any of these liability shields.
And I want to help out anybody and attorneys out there. And again, I'm not a big fan of attorneys, but Jeff, you've restored my faith. You're just a godly man, and one of my heroes. There's something called Up to Date that a lot of physicians subscribe to. It's a journal collator where we can go online and look up all types of medical information, and we get continuing medical education from that. So if you have a physician and you want to understand what he knows or doesn't know about the coronavirus, just look up, subpoena his up-to-date research. And if he has up-to-date research and he has seen that there are treatments available, then I would tell you he's operating in bad faith. The other thing I would look at is the pharmacies that refuse to fill prescriptions that are legitimate prescriptions by physicians. Because I had a patient the other day, established patient. I called them in a medication. I called them in some hydroxychloroquine. I called them in all the medications on our protocol. And the pharmacist called me and said, I can't fill the hydroxychloroquine. And I said, okay, I just need your full name and all your information. And the pharmacist was like, well, why? And I said, I want to document it in my electronic medical record, which will stay with this patient. Because if this patient has an adverse outcome, when I know that this early treatment would save their lives based on studies as far back as 2005 in the Journal of Virology, I just want to document the person that decided to override my treatment so that if the patient dies and the family decides for litigation, they will know who to serve first. And you know what he said? He goes, I'll fill it.
Nice.
And that's what, as physicians, we have a responsibility to stand for our patients. My clinics have treated over 3,000 patients early by the book for COVID-19 and have not lost one that we treated early. Not one patient. Even patients with comorbid disease and up to the age of 90. So this is something that I'm passionate about. I just had a patient come to me the other day for surgery, and she said her endocrinologist told her he will no longer treat her if she doesn't become vaccinated. He is discriminating against her because she will not accept something in her body. And I think that would fall under some type of law. I can't discriminate against a patient because they will or won't do something. And I would use the fact that when I was a resident in the early 90s, we were treating HIV patients when that was a death sentence. And I was operating on these patients. They would come in with gunshot wounds, stabbings, car accidents. And not one physician said, well, I'm not going to treat this patient because they have HIV. We knew they did. I mean, we would test them. We knew they had it. We would still operate on them. And if we stuck ourselves, it could be a potential death sentence at that time. So I have no respect for a physician that refuses to treat someone. And that means tells me they don't even, and folks, if someone says that to you, you probably don't want to go to them anyway because they're either unethical or they're just a bad physician because they can't read.
Well, that's what I'm thinking is you don't want that doctor because that kind of judgment applied to other types of, situations that are critical for your ongoing health might not be the kind of judgment that you want.
Correct. So to recap, mask mandates can be defeated.
Yes.
Vaccine mandates can be defeated.
Yes.
How do people get in touch with you if they want to get these templates?
So I would suggest getting on my blog because that's the one place where I'm not totally overwhelmed with message volume right now. And so that would be at www.coffeeandcovid.com.
I love it. As a newly minted coffee drinker, I really like that. And tell me a little bit about, you mentioned, you had talked to me about this offline. I understand that you're putting together a group of attorneys that are being cast away, and there's some really smart ones. And I hear there's one from a major medical organization that's joining you. Can you talk about that?
So I can't use anybody's names.
No, I don't want you to use a name, but can you talk about where they're from and where they come over?
So we've got now a coalition of over 40 allied attorneys from all over the Southeast up to New York, to Texas, to California, Ohio, Wisconsin, many states. And we're just building that network out. And I'd like to see 200 attorneys in it. The other thing I'm doing is I'm helping CCDF, who you mentioned before, to stand up this national legal group. And they're going to start taking on some of these bigger cases. So I've been working with them to get that group, fully online.
What type of attorneys are coming into that group? What are their backgrounds?
So you're talking about the CCDF group?
Yes.
Yeah. So we just added an attorney, for example, who has labor and employment litigation experience with a large law firm and has been fighting in the vaccine space in Wisconsin for 2 years. Because in that state, they were trying to delete all the exemptions that parents had to childhood vaccination, the religious exemption and so on. So she was involved in that. So we're real excited to have her on board.
That's yeah, I heard that she worked for a large pharmaceutical company at one point. So
well, yeah, we got a legal secretary who's got almost 30 years of experience, and she works for currently a 3,000 person law firm, and the two biggest groups they have are Big Tobacco and Big Pharma. And her particular working group is focused on Johnson & Johnson.
That's great. Well, we'll close with this. You mentioned this to me, and we're kind of going to segue a little bit. Well, you were talking about how we win this war against the Constitution, how we get folks to stand. I believe we have a hidden army out there, a peaceful, law-abiding army that could stand up and make a difference in this nation, and that would be?
Well, I think there's two parts to it. I think we need a county-by-county strategy, right? If you look at an electoral map of the U.S., a county by county electoral map, what do you see? You see a sea of red with these little blue tassels around the sides, right? And we got to activate all those people in all those counties and teach them about the power that they have.
And that's CCDF.
And that's one, right. CCDF is focused on that mission too. And then the second thing is, I feel like personally that if we could wake up 15% of the churches in this country, right, then it would transform everything. And when I talk to pastors about this, I tell them, Pastor, look, when the church wakes up, this will all be over. But if the church doesn't wake up, this will be all over.
Wow. And those are the words that we are either going to live by as a free nation, or we're going to become a byword in history as a nation that, we're going to go down in history. If the church doesn't wake up, then we will go down in history as the one country that had it all and handed it away. We had it all because of men with great faith, trusted God, and they pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor.
That's right.
And if we can't reactivate the church, if there's not an awakening to pledge your life, your fortunes, and your sacred honor. I was talking to a pastor the other day, and he's like, well, I can't really talk about that because, I don't want to be political. And I go, what do you mean? He goes, well, if people hear that, they'll stop going to church. And I go, oh, you mean you'll lose votes? And he got quiet. It's a time to stand. This is the right thing to do. It's the righteous and moral thing to do. And it's a way we're going to keep our country.
I agree.
All right, brother, listen, I'm going to have you back. I could talk to you for hours because you are one of the smartest people I know.
Well, thank you.
Jeff Childers, folks, coffeeandcovid.com.
That's right.
You can get the template. Everyone fight back against mask mandates. Fight back peacefully against vaccine mandates. There is a way forward. We won't be silenced. Please like and share this podcast. Please go to your podcast list if you're hearing it for the first time and subscribe to The Scalpel. It's free. I don't have any advertisers. This is just cheaper than therapy for me. So I think it's real important to get this word out. So let's make this go viral and let's take back this nation. It's the only way we're going to keep freedom rolling.
Head high, protest line. Freedom scribbled on your sign. Headline, New York Times. Standing on the edge of a revolution. Hey, hey, just obey. Your secret's safe with the NSA. In God we trust, or the CIA. Standing on the edge of a revolution. Yeah, we're standing on the edge of a revolution. Revolution.
The Scalpel with Dr. Keith Rose.
Give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts and subscribe to The Scalpel wherever you listen to podcasts. Follow us on Instagram at The Scalpel Podcast, on Twitter at The Scalpel Edge, email kfr@scalpeledge.com, or the website scalpeledge.com.